We have started recording. I also want to mention that we have one survey question this evening, or this afternoon, or this morning, for those of you who might be far away. And I'm going to start it now. And it's called the urgency trifecta. The question is, which of the following is the most urgent reason to pass the Biden-Harris jobs, families, Made in America tax plan as soon as possible? Is it because the climate clock is ticking, that millions of people have urgent needs, that the midterms are next year, or is it all of the above? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to give a little bit of format information about how we can spend our time best for the next roughly 90 minutes. After I speak, our global co-chair, Sue Altus, is going to give us some opening comments. Then we are going to have a PowerPoint presentation with bullet point options for guiding our open discussion. We're going to try to move through that with 4 presenters, 2 from proDA and 2 from DA Germany Climate Caucus, a brand new caucus from DA Germany. We're going to try to accomplish that in fewer than 40 minutes, perhaps around 30 minutes. And while we're doing that, we're going to ask that all of you make a mental note, or perhaps some of you would even like to make a note in writing of 3 items that you think are important. It might be an impression you have listening to the information we offer. It might be some kind of comment or response, or it might be a question. And when we finish our presentations, then we're going to go into breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, each breakout room group will designate a reporter quickly, no hemming and hawing. And we're going to ask that reporter to listen to what the members of the group have to say and write down 3 items that then the reporter will present to the plenary as a way of kicking off our open discussion. We really are eager to discuss and want to mention from the get-go that our presenters, although we've been working hard, even rehearsing, gathering lots of information, will be able to answer some of your questions, but we perceive this group to be a source of abundant information, and we really want to share points of view and our hopes and expectations, and maybe some questions will be left unanswered. We may have to get back to them. Let's see what happens. All right, I'm going to leave the survey open just a little bit longer and ask Sue to give us her opening comments, our global co-chair from the Toronto area.
Thank you, Bruce. And I want to thank the organizers of this event and the whole series, Biden-Harris progress reports. It's been really engaging, informative, action-oriented. Really gives all of us things to think about. So thank you for your work on the research and preparation and putting on great events. And I want to encourage everyone who finds today's activities informative and encouraging to please think about sharing with others. Then when the next one comes around, let's get even more folks informed about what's happening in the administration, where we can push for a little more, and where we can celebrate progressive action happening in our administration. So I wanted to also share that the Progressive Caucus has a monthly book club, and the next meeting is coming up soon on May 31st, when the club is talking about the Tea Party and the remaking of remaking of conservative America, I think is the name of it. I'm sorry. something like that. I can pop a link in the chat. And also wanted to let folks know that in addition to the acts that we'll be talking about today, there are some progressives who are pushing for even more bold approaches around a transformational economic recovery package. So they're pushing for the Thrive Act, and the Thrive Act offers a blueprint for economic renewal backed by a movement of movements, including unions, racial justice, climate, and other grassroots groups. And it was introduced to Congress in April of 2021. And its lead sponsors are Senators Ed Markey and Jeff Merkley, and Representatives Debbie Dingell, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Pramila Jayapal, Earl Blumenauer, Ro Khanna, Yvette Clark, and Annette Barragan. So I encourage you to contact, look into the Thrive Act. I can drop a link into the chat. Look into it, and you might want to call your representatives and let them know that this is something you support if you do. And I also wanted to put in a plug for France's Political Power Hour, which is every Wednesday evening, where they have actually a toll-free number set up for folks in France to call their representatives in Congress. So if you're tuning in from France, you might be interested in that toll-free number. All right, thanks, Bruce. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sue. We're ending our survey now, and our urgency trifecta question was, which of the following is the most urgent reason to pass the Biden-Harris plans as soon as possible? And you can see some of us said it's the climate clock. That is really urgent. I agree. Millions of people have urgent needs. I agree. The midterms are next year. That's crucial. And all of the above, it seems as though the majority of us say all of those are important. And that really does make it an urgency trifecta that we are going to use now to move us through our PowerPoint presentations. I'm going to share my screen and move to our PowerPoint presentation and turn the floor over to Dash Nesbitt, who is a member of the DA Germany Climate Caucus. He will be talking to us a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. But before he does, you can see here our lineup for these presentations. We say in 40 minutes or less. We're going to try to finish in 30 minutes or less. And wherever you see yellow print here, that's a link to dive into the weeds a little bit for more information. And it's likely that every one of these images also is linked to something that can give you more information. I want to just take a minute to say that we also want to provide a little context with some budgetary fun facts. They might not be so much fun for those 8 million people who were employed in February of 2020, but remain unemployed in February 2021. Take a look at this. We have in 2020 a $6.4 trillion budget. And for 2020, according to the Government Accountability Office, we had $714 billion in spending, military spending. The proposed American Rescue Plan is $1.9 trillion spread over 10 years. The American Jobs Plan, $2.3 trillion spread over 10 years, and $1.8 trillion for the American Families Plan. The total is the equivalent of $600 billion a year, or roughly $114 billion less than we spent in 2020 for military. And as we're going to learn, the American Made in America tax plan will pay for the American Jobs Plan in over 15 years and generate revenue permanently. All right, so much for the context. Let's hear what's going on with the American Rescue Plan. Dash?
Yes, so I'll do a quick overview of this legislation. It was signed on March 11th by President Biden, left Congress without any Republican votes through budget reconciliation, and used one of our 3 opportunities for reconciliation legislation this year to left. A quick overview of the contents. The final bill featured a larger stimulus check of $1,400, which Joe Manchin negotiated to start phasing out at $80,000 per year earners, rather than the House proposed $100,000. Unemployment benefits in the bill are $300 per week, phasing out in September, also lowered at Joe Manchin's request from the House proposed $400 per week through October. Among the bill's small business relief, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund provides grants to restaurants and bars to meet payroll, and something personal to me as a musician by profession, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant supports music halls and concert venues. And I can say my music industry friends in the US are completely devastated by the pandemic. There's no work and no hope, and many think the music industry may not recover, so this is direly needed and appreciated. Of course, one of the most important investments from the bill is in COVID mitigation programs. The money is going towards vaccine production and distribution, testing and contact tracing, community health centers, PPE, genomic sequencing and analytics, as well as vaccine confidence programs aiming to increase vaccination rates. Many billions are going to schools to improve ventilation and reduce classroom size to make in-person schooling possible again. And the bill extends the existing 15% increase in food stamp benefits from previous stimulus bills, which was set to expire. Transit is receiving a great amount of money as well in order to counteract the reduced revenues due to lower ridership. This money goes to public transit, but also airlines and Amtrak as well. And there was support to combat evictions and foreclosures with special support for the recently homeless and those escaping domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see the strengths and weaknesses of the bill, and I'll give a small update on how things have progressed since the legislation has been in effect for over 2 months. Stimulus checks are still being rolled out. As of late April, it was up to 161 million payments, with many going to those who've recently filed a tax return. The COVID programs have been very successful. The CDC said last week that 155 million citizens, or 59% of adults, have had their first dose, vaccine dose, and the vaccines are proving very protective against the variants currently in the US. Biden has made a goal of 70% of adults having their first dose by July 4th. Many Republicans have been caught touting to their constituents the benefits of some of the provisions that they voted against. For example, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has been praising the benefits to restaurant owners. This exemplifies well the tricky political position the American Rescue Plan puts Republicans in. The bill and its benefits are very popular with the American people. However, the Republican bloc uniformly voted against it. Democrats plan to make the most out of this politically leading up to the 2022 midterms. Also noteworthy, Republicans have used their opposition to claim that Biden has reneged on his pledge to be a bipartisan president, but the White House holds that the bill had large support from Republican and independent voters in polling. For example, a CBS News poll from March 12th, the day after it was signed, showed 75% of Americans supporting the bill, including 46% of Republicans, which, while not a majority of Republicans, 46% is an awful lot. All of the polling I found on this bill showed between 60 to 76% approval across the political spectrum. Now, as we all know, in the Progressive Caucus, the $15 minimum wage was not included in the final bill, as the Senate parliamentarian decided it didn't qualify to be included in budget reconciliation. For now, it remains unclear how the minimum wage hike will proceed now that budget reconciliation is no longer an option and filibuster reform does not yet have the votes. I would like to also say one other weakness, I think, is that all the COVID programs were specifically focused on the US, and there was no effort to have any international solidarity, really. And that's something from a climate perspective. This is our opportunity to strengthen those muscles of being more internationally supported. So that's the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you very much, Dash. I want to remind those or to let those know who may have hopped on a little later that we're asking everyone to make a mental note or maybe even write down some impressions, maybe comments or questions, and we're going to take those into breakout rooms when we've finished these initial presentations. When we get back then out of the breakout rooms and have reported with one reporter per group, giving us an account of what was discussed with 3 items from each group, then we'll have an open discussion. And at that time, we'll go back through these slides so that you can recall a little bit more what we've said. And as I go on now to the American Jobs Plan, I also want to note that the American Rescue Plan has been deemed quite a success. And we know that things are improving in the United States dramatically right now as far as COVID is concerned. And one of the things that we might find frustrating is that the provisions in the plan are temporary. And the American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan are legislative plans to make many of the provisions permanent. The American Jobs Plan is pretty hot right now. It is being discussed daily with the talking heads and everybody signing in with points of view and news. It's kind of hard to follow right now. And as you can see here, there's quite a laundry list from normal conventional infrastructure items like highways, bridges, ports, etc., water, electric grid, broadband, refitting homes and commercial buildings, working on schools, veterans hospitals, federal buildings. And now we get into the more soft infrastructure realm with the care economy, manufacturing, creating good quality jobs, and ensuring worker access to unions and collective bargaining. I think that here too we can look at strengths and weaknesses and also consider a pathway to passage. I consider strengths of the jobs plan to be that it has hard and soft infrastructure components. A little while ago, I began to ask myself, wait a minute, you know, I'm not even sure I have a definition of infrastructure, much less soft infrastructure. And I want to offer one for soft infrastructure quickly, saying that it is all institutions that maintain the economic, health, social, environmental, and cultural standards of a country. Some people might say the hard infrastructure are the physical things, and the soft infrastructure components are the social things. I like it that the American Jobs Plan encompasses both in an ambitious way. Also, the way it negotiates the intersection between infrastructure and climate change in this, what Al Gore called the climate moment in 2022, I think is very important. Some, including many progressive champions who are promoting the Thrive Act, say that 2.3 trillion spread over 10 years is far less than is necessary, and that it would be more appropriate to allocate 10 trillion in 10 years, or spreading out over 10 years, getting to an amount that might be a little more than the amount we spend on military spending each year. There are others who say that the CO2 reduction pace may be a little inadequate, and that it's possible that we need more faster. When we talk then about the pathway to passage, we talked a little bit about whether it's going to be bipartisan, reconciliation, or maybe both. One thing is clear, if you come back to this presentation later and click on the report card from the American Association of Civil Engineers, you'll see that most states in the United States get a C or a D. That means the need is really, really big. And so much so that if you look at the congressional districts, 435 of them right now, according to the source we see on the right, the approval rate is anywhere between 65 and 90%. That's bipartisan, if you ask me. So, as I said, a strength is a soft infrastructure approach, and there are either tens or hundreds of billions of dollars being allocated or envisioned for the care economy, for manufacturing, for good quality jobs, and for worker access to unions and collective bargaining. As Dash said, there isn't right now that push for the $15, at least $15 minimum wage. So the fight for 15 continues, although President Biden has just signed an executive order to make sure that workers associated with government federal contracts do get $15 an hour. And he is also pushing for that in the care economy. The climate action section of the bill, we have a lot of provisions for rebates, loans, grants, extending tax incentives for clean power, vehicle electrification, building electrification, clean manufacturing, equity and justice, making sure that 40% of the benefits go to disadvantaged communities, and then also conservation, point where I want to say I want those who are fracking and pumping for oil and polluting our environment to take care of this themselves, actually, personal opinion. The plan provides federal funding for that and also for civilian climate corps. By the way, just this past week, our government approved a plan for the first major offshore wind farm that would be a part of clean power and our shift to renewable energy with up to 65 or 70 big wind generators offshore by Martha's Vineyard. It's important to note that while we currently have about 70 in the United States, Europe has over 5,000. So we have quite a bit of catching up to do. As Sue mentioned, there also is this Thrive Act, which stands for Transforming, Healing, Renewing by Investing in a Vibrant Economy and spending far more over the next 10 years to create 15 million good jobs with a 50% climate pollution reduction by 2030, not 40, but 50% of the benefits going to frontline communities. And you can click here or here if you look at this later for more information about the Thrive Act. It's important to think about it also in the context of the new Green Deal. All right, and thinking about CO2 reduction, is more needed faster? Here are some questions. What is necessary to compensate for our century of neglect? The Climate Action Network suggests that maybe in order also for us to be a global leader, instead of committing the average among the Paris Agreement members now of 50% by 2030, we ought to be shooting for 70% and be thinking about phasing out fracking and nuclear power, ending fossil fuel subsidies, and thinking more about how, while we're reducing our CO2 emissions, that we can transition to more regenerative agriculture and take more CO2 out of the atmosphere. Kiss the Ground is a very impressive documentary about that, and you can read the Common Dreams article also about the more ambitious CO2 reduction plan. So the pathway to passage. Right now, it seems as though more and more are talking about two bills instead of one, maybe with a bipartisan hard infrastructure bill, and with the Republicans saying that they would come back with a counteroffer to their $580 billion proposal 2 days ago, and they haven't done that. And also with the possibility that we would move with them on a bipartisan basis for the hard infrastructure part, and then maybe even combine the rest of the infrastructure bill together with American Families Plan and pass that with reconciliation. When we do that, we know we currently have the Manchin cinema factor to deal with. And while we're speaking, Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, is crisscrossing the United States right now, talking to media and people in every state about the virtues of the American Jobs Plan. Let's keep an eye on him. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk about the American Families Plan.
Hi, yeah, I'm Stephanie, and I'm from the Germany Climate Caucus, and hopefully I can cover the purpose of the plan, at least from my perspective, some main highlights, and then the strengths and weaknesses of the plan, especially in a climate change perspective. And then finally, I might cover the pathway to passage, but Bruce pretty much already did that. So yeah, so the purpose that I gathered when I was reading through the plan after a couple times was to improve soft infrastructure, as Bruce has spoken about. So when I say soft infrastructure, to me, I visualize like the things in society that you need to make sure that your people are healthy, like mentally healthy, economically healthy. So yeah, I think it's a really good plan to bring America to the 21st century. And I also really enjoyed the quote down here at the bottom of the screen by Biden. He said, "It's time to build our economy from the bottom up and from the middle out, not the top down." And I think that's a really apt way to summarize this whole plan. So some main highlights, though, are paid leave is introduced up to 12 weeks, and that paid leave could be used for sick leave, parental leave, bereavement. Second of all, there was a focused effort to make childcare more affordable, in that parents wouldn't have to use too much of their wages to take care of the children that we need for society, and also to increase the childcare workforce. Education is another huge aspect in this plan. So one of the main things you might have already heard about is that it provides an extra 4 years of education, 2 years for preschool, and then 2 years for community college. And teachers, we need more teachers. We need a more diverse teaching workforce for those in BIPOC communities. And finally, there was somewhat of an attempt to make healthcare more affordable in this plan. When I say somewhat of an attempt, it went as far as continuing the ACA premiums. However, Medicare is not expanded upon in it. Next slide, please, Bruce. Yeah, so here are some strengths and weaknesses from a progressive viewpoint. I kind of wanted to talk more about climate change, but first I'll go over this. So the strengths are, it seems like a really honest attempt to address the root causes for a lot of the forms inequality takes in our country. And like I said, it updates America to the 21st century is the bare minimum. Some weaknesses are the White House, when they talk about this plan, they seem a little bit too open to compromise. Drug pricing was actually in earlier drafts of this plan, but it was scrapped. And like I said, there's a somewhat weak stance on healthcare. From a climate change perspective, I think, so the things that I noticed are there's a really clear connection to the American Jobs Plan that Bruce was talking about. The improved education for kids means that someday they can take these jobs that are created through the American Jobs Plan. And they would be greener jobs, so that's good. Another thing is there is some improvement for the access to healthcare, and so any improvement there is a good thing, especially for BIPOC people who face a lot of environmental injustices within their homes. Like, for example, they tend to live in higher polluted areas than wealthier white Americans. And with that comes additional risk, say a higher risk of dying of COVID, and you can imagine other things. Speaking of COVID, it seems to be somewhat preparing for the next pandemic. And I know that sounds depressing, but scientists predict that they're going to become more frequent. So we just have to deal with that reality. And so that means we need to have actions that prepare us for that. So the childcare policy in this plan, I think, would have been nice, right, to deal with COVID. However, there are some other things like internet access. The internet access wasn't mentioned at all, and it would be really good for kids if they're taken out of school due to a pandemic to have better access to help to internet. And finally, from my point of view, I didn't see anything mentioned about family planning within the plan. And family planning is actually one of the main ways to mitigate climate change. And so I was really surprised to see that there wasn't improved access to family planning. And I was hoping to see that. Finally, as Bruce has said, the pathway to passage is going to be hard. So the main idea is to combine it with parts of the American Jobs Plan and pass it through reconciliation. Of course, that can be unpopular. Some people refer to it as like a Trojan horse. Manchin refers to it as an omnibus. Yeah, but if we look at the next slide, please. Yeah, just a quick overview. We see that a lot of the policies and the actions, individual actions within this plan are actually really popular with Americans, like the majority of Americans. And it's really disappointing to continuously see this disparity between, everyday Americans, even including conservative Americans, and, the Congress Republicans, the fact that Congress Republicans don't vote to pass these things that we want. And so that I find disappointing. But yeah, that's the overview of the American Families Plan.
Thank you very much, Stephanie and Dash from the DA Germany Climate Caucus. We'll be looking more from them moving forward. We're very glad that they joined us this evening, and they'll stay with us. All right, now we're going to move on to the Made in America tax plan. And we have an expert in tax policy with us this evening, Reina Saldana from the Progressive Caucus of Democrats Abroad. Reina, take it away.
You are terrible. Caveat, I am not a tax expert. So how do we pay for it? The big question. 2.3 trillion in 10 years is what Biden wants to raise. And just FYI, the Trump tax cuts, if allowed to continue through 2025, will cost us $2.3 trillion. So interesting note. So if you could go to slide number 1, please, Bruce. The graph shows the levels of revenue raised by the different taxes Biden wants to enact. Biden will do this by raising personal and corporate taxes, changing the tax code to close loopholes and induce onshoring of jobs rather than offshoring. Importantly, no one making less than $400,000 a year will have their taxes raised. So the first of the taxes, this is the dry bit now for everyone, the personal taxes. Raising the capital gains tax on earners making over $1 million a year from 20% to 39.6%. This is a tax on selling investments that have been held less than 1 year. This affects the top 0.3% of Americans, and it will raise about $800 billion in revenue. Next slide, please. Next, he's going to raise income taxes on the highest earners, only those, again, making over $400,000 a year. This slide shows a steady decline in tax rates for the top 1% and 0.1% since the 1940s. Next slide, please. individuals making over 400,000 or couples making over 630,000 will pay 39.6% in federal income tax. This affects fewer than 1.8% of Americans. All the taxes, as you can see, are the same as Trump's, except for the highest earners. Later on, we'll also have a link to Bernie's tax brackets in case anybody is interested. Next slide, please. He also may, again, this is just a plan. This is not an actual bill, so all of these are subject to change. Impose a payroll tax of 12.4% on incomes over 400,000. The 12.4% is split in employer and employee. So we only pay 6.2 and employer pays 0.2. As you can see in the graph, the highest burden of payroll taxes falls on the poor and middle class. We pay the full 12.4. But as people make more and more money, it's less and less. So the top 1% and 0.1% of earners end up paying about 2% or 0.9% respectively, instead of 12%. He also wants to cap itemized deductions at 28%. And this is weedy stuff, phase out the pass-through deductions. This will raise about $300 billion in revenue. One of the other things talked about extensively that doesn't affect, I don't think, any of us, maybe I'm wrong, estate taxes. Raising the estate tax from 40% to 45%, but the first 5.3 million is exempt, and then ending step-up basis on inherited assets. Again, the first 1 million is exempt. Also closing a real estate loophole that allows people who sell in real estate to defer their payments of capital gains. Now they have to pay on profits over 500,000. Next slide, please. So now we move on to corporate taxes. Next slide. Oh, you got it. Okay. So there's been a lot of talk about making the wealthy pay their fair share. So we move on to corporations. Many of the most successful ones we know don't even pay taxes. This chart shows the burden of raising the federal government's revenue is on labor. In the 50s, labor paid 51%, corporations 28%. As of 2019, labor shouldered 85% of the burden and corporations only 8%. Next slide, please. So he's going to raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. Corporate tax rates have not been this low since 1938, when they were 19%. Through the massive growth of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the corporate tax rate was much higher. It was over 45%. And still we had massive growth. As you can see in the slide, Trump dropped the rate from an already low 35% to 21%. Biden is already compromising by only raising it halfway, between 35 and 21. This tax falls largely on shareholders and companies making particularly high profit margins. There are also a number of tax changes to mitigate profit shifting to tax havens, credits to induce onshoring of jobs, closing loopholes. All of these are super complex and detailed. One is the GILTI provision, a discussion of minimum tax rates on foreign profits of 21%, another 15% of a minimum book rate tax. So that's like if a company is reporting profits to its shareholders, but then it claims it has no income to the government, can't do that anymore, has to pay 15%. And then there's a bunch of other little ones, cracking down on tax havens, repealing the FDII, negotiating with other countries to determine a global minimum tax, and funding the IRS with $80 billion, which is super important if we want to get tax evaders. So it also includes a series of tax credits for renewable and clean energy development, and superfund taxes on polluters to fund a cleanup fund. There's also a new renters tax credit to help people of low income, and a $15,000 first-time home buyer credit. So that's the plan. Its strengths, I believe, are that it focuses on the wealthiest and corporations. The majority of Americans will not see their taxes increase. Many of these changes are long overdue and are actually quite incremental and balanced in scope. Weaknesses, not nearly big or bold enough. It's been talked about that what was needed is between 10 trillion and 16 trillion over the next 10 years to come in high, so there's room to negotiate down, which we know is always the case. The money here is fine if climate change wasn't an issue, but because it is, this does not come close to what's necessary. It's clear that the political will to really take on climate change at this point, climate justice, environmental justice, is missing. The fact that money for carbon capture is in there, people in the know understand that that's wasteful and goes in the wrong direction. Biden is already compromising with this price tag and will need to compromise further with conservative Dems. We know who we're talking about. Instead, he should be using carrot and stick to make a deal. Filibuster should have been reformed. Maybe it still will be. So this could pass with 51 votes. It's really a waste of time trying to negotiate a bipartisan deal, which they continue to talk about, but I think it's wasteful at this point. Dems that are holding out for the SALT tax to be repealed, the state and local taxes, this will minimize tax revenue to help the wealthiest. So that's also a thorn in the side. Something else that's missing here that I feel would have been really helpful was a financial transaction tax on Wall Street, on stock trades. This is a completely painless tax, unfelt by anyone, and it would have made billions and curbed reckless speculation. The SEC actually does this already to fund its own operations, and so that would provide a very successful model on which to build. As for passage, we can discuss this, but I think we've discussed the different options already with the other things. And then there are alternative tax plans that we also can discuss if people want to. I have some information about it.
Thank you very much, Raina. At this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen for a while. Come back to the gallery view. And as I mentioned now, we're going to go into groups, breakout rooms. I'm going to create 6 of them. There'll be 6 of us in each of the rooms. We'll select one reporter immediately, and then for 10 minutes, we'll discuss our impressions, our comments, questions we might have. The reporter will collect 3 of them, and we'll report those back to our plenary session after 10 minutes, and that will jumpstart our open discussion. All right. And when we come back, then I'll just ask, who is the reporter for room number 1, room number 2? And I'll ask you then to unmute and report the 3 most important things you've gathered from your group. This will go for 10 minutes now. I hope it works. I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, you wanted us to record, I think a few of us missed this, to record just a few notes, or?
Yes. And because you're speaking right now, I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to be the reporter.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
And that might also mean discussion leader, and ask everyone for what their impressions are, what comments they have, maybe questions. And then you have executive power to choose the ones you think are the top three to bring back to the plenary session.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk.
Okay, did any of the topics speak to anyone particularly? Did anyone want to kind of kick it off? Any impressions they came away with?
I can say off the top of my head, obviously climate is, to me anyway, to probably most of us, it's the fire that's already been lit and nobody seems to be using what they need to put it out. But I think the tax, I have to say, besides being burnt out, I've been very just disheartened at all the forces arrayed against Biden. But with the taxes, until we change campaign finance, I just don't see it changing. That's, you look at the things where he's backed down on, like healthcare. And healthcare is so humongous. The lobbying power.
Most people do have a sense that the average citizen is screwed, and that the rich are have been throwing a giant party for a long time, and that there needs to be some redress. So I think that part of it I'm not so concerned about. Obviously we still need to push on it, and it's because it's so popular, it gives us a great wedge. I think you're right in saying, wish that they'd been even more aggressive, but when you look at Biden's tax policy versus Obama, he's taken up a lot of the Bernie Warren progressive wing ideas, although not as much. I should say I'm Mike. I'm talking from Stockholm, Sweden. And originally from New York, and nice to meet all of you progressives.
Welcome.
I want to say hello to Mike quickly too. Mike wrote a Facebook message in response to this meeting asking, what about the fifth crisis, the crisis of our democracy? And I think it would be great if something about that came out of this back into our plenary session.
Thanks for saying that. I feel like democratization, is such a crisis now. Obviously, what we have is under attack, and what we had has been radically deficient for such a long time that, America should be the most democratic nation. All the people who are kind of wrapping themselves in the American flag, let's make America the greatest democracy, not the least democratic democracy. And that means all of those things in the John Lewis Act and HR now S1 and statehood for the District of Columbia, where I vote. And I never try to contact my representatives because to me it's quite futile. I mean, they're mostly progressive and they support us, but they don't really count, do they?
Who are your representatives in DC?
Here's Bruce. Oh, Bruce. You're muted.
I just want to listen for a minute and note that we have about 3 minutes left. I don't want to say anything.
Okay.
I guess I had a point on that jobs plan with regard to the collective bargaining. Does anybody know what about that element of the plan? Do you know what I'm referring to?
You mean that to allow bargaining without bullying people and intimidating?
Well, yeah, I guess that's part of it, but I'm for me, everything rests really on that in terms of the long term.
Welcome back, everyone. I was able to look in on most groups, and it seemed as though things were going pretty well. I'd like now to ask everyone who was delegated the reporter status to sign in with a quick, perhaps just 1 minute summary with reference maybe to the 3 items that you consider most important. We have 6 groups, and I'd like to ask the reporter for group number 1 to unmute and take it away. Who was the reporter for group number 1?
Do we know what group our numbers are?
I don't know what our number was.
That is pretty good.
You may need to remind people if you know, Bruce.
Let me see if I can still find that. If not, we'll just Group number 1 was George, Mason, Michael, Stephanie.
Yeah, okay, I can do that. We talked quickly. We're being good progressives, and we're already critiquing these plans, and we're not sure if it's even possible to pass it without Republican help. But that's something we're concerned about. We have to get the facts out there. It's important to let people know that these plans do not affect most tax-paying Americans. Lastly, we have to work on framing because, as one of our discussion groups said, tax equals socialism equals communism equals Soviet Union. So we have to work on that framing. And there is some hope, though, because Biden is being quite a bit more progressive than we thought he would be.
Thank you very much, Mason. And thanks everyone for tipping me off that it's important to know what your group is. Room number 2 was Madeline, Maggie, Marjorie, Sarah, and Sharon Ann.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I was the reporter. We centered much of our discussion around tax, that the tax message is a little inadequate. It needs to be made much clearer, much louder, and more detailed as to what impacts who. And it was also observed that a lot of these plans, while more progressive than plans have been in the past, are at their core pretty conservative. So it's kind of weird being progressives and discussing plans of this ilk.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It sounds as though we're going to be talking a little bit more about the Made in America tax plan. Room number 3, Alex, Beverly, Michael, Raina, and Renee.
Okay, so I took notes. We had the same as the other group was how do we get the message out? It seems, that the constituency is quite ill informed and they're in their own bubble and they're hearing their own sound bites. So how do we get this information out? Anytime people are polled or surveyed, there's a resounding majority of people that agree with taxing the rich. So how do we spread the word better? We also talked about how do we actually get progressive policies advanced, and one of the things that could help would be pushing DC and Puerto Rican statehood because they would have more progressive representatives. And we also talked about this idea of party unity at all costs and how debilitating that actually is, and how important it is to keep pushing from the left and keep pushing because we are the ones who are representing and trying to aid the majority of people, the middle class, the lower middle class, the low class, and we are the majority. And so we have to fight against this idea of party unity because it's false. It's completely false.
Thank you very much, Raina. We'll move on to room number 4 with Brigitte, Karen, Mark, Marjorie, and Wen.
All right, first of all, I have to clarify, I got to change my name tag. I'm not Brigitte, I'm Ted, as in Ted Bear.
Hi, Ted.
That's me.
Hi, Ted.
So everybody knows. We focused on discussion of the jobs plan and sort of surveyed different elements of it. In particular, soft versus hard infrastructure, combining, for instance, for childcare, elements that would also take it out of private homes and make it more public. So that was one point. We talked also about the collective bargaining aspect of the jobs plan, and I took particular interest in that because I'm not sure what it calls for, and the response on that, we're just looking as to how can that be more established systemically in the economy. We had one of our members talk about creating more stability for gig the gig economy, so that as you know, people are making up their own way of living, that they can have security in doing so. Those are some of the topics that we kind of touched on.
Thank you very much, Ted. I want to say that I dropped in the chat box maybe 2 paragraphs from the American Jobs Plan on collective bargaining and unions. And after this presentation, everyone will have access. I'll put the whole presentation address in the chat box, and you can go there and click on the American Jobs Plan icon and then scroll down to the things that interest you most.
Bruce, you're gonna have to re-drop everything because the chat box after we return from breakout rooms is completely empty.
Got it. Moving on to room number 5, we have Caitlin, Antar, Naomi, Rebecca, Sue, and Tanya.
Hi. Greetings from room 5. We had a wide-ranging discussion. It was mostly anchored around taxes, but I wanted to first bring up, we started with this just a moment of just silence to let it sink in. The comparison, the figures that you showed us, Bruce, of the military budget compared to what we're talking about with these plans. And that is something that I think really deserves to be, let that sink in. It was really powerful. Mostly what we were talking about with taxes was how Americans abroad always feel left out. And many people are very worried that they get caught up in compliance reporting, which is apparently the hearings that are going on now, that this is possibly going to be increasing. And we always seem to be forgotten, and that this is also an important part. And that we as, in addition to that, we as Americans who live abroad also have a lot to offer to Americans and also to our lawmakers back home in communicating how the US looks from abroad, how unregulated it looks compared to Europe, to put things into perspective, because Americans seem to make their laws in a bit of a bubble without a lot of comparison. There was also concern about Republican governments who are threatening and surely follow through on not distributing unemployment benefits to their citizens because they think this is dangerous. And this was something that was very concerning. And last was that the jobs plan is actually very much a climate change plan or addressing the climate change plan. And before the midterms, when we are looking at possibly losing the House and the Senate, we'll see. We all have to work hard to make sure that doesn't happen, but that's what it looks like at the moment. But the window is closing for us to get something substantially done to save the climate by getting this done. And so the clock is ticking, as you said at the very beginning of our meeting. Those were our thoughts.
Anya, thank you very much. And we're going to go on to room number 6 with Austin, Brett, Dash, John, and Stephanie.
Yep, I've got some notes here. So one thing we discussed was the priority really needs to be the midterms, and how can we make sure that those turn out successful? So similar to what Tanya was saying. And there was also some concern about just how much radical change this will make into American society, and how realistic is it? How, we are not always confident in our American countrymen following through with this kind of thing. And we did a bit of a temperature check about how our family and friends back home are feeling about this legislation. And a lot of it was that everybody's still just trying to get through the pandemic. So this is a lot of big legislative goals, and the public's maybe just going to be coming around to grappling with it as we're coming out of the pandemic, but it's not quite there yet. So that's what we talked about.
All right. Thank you to all the groups. That gives us a kind of orientation for spending another 10 minutes or so in open discussion. And for this part, now I'm going to ask Sue and Raina to keep their eyes on the chat box. If you would like to make a 1-minute statement, maybe raising a point or asking a question, please in the chat box enter * hand up and we'll generate a queue. And while you're starting to do that and the queue begins to take shape, I'm going to say one of the things that we might realize at this point is that it's called the American Jobs Plan. And in messaging about it, it seems to me that over and over again, we hear that it's going to create good paying jobs. And there's not so often a mention of how we are going to combat climate change successfully. And I think there's a perception that that is not effective. But I want to make a quick claim that it could be very effective. And it goes something like this. We had an industrial revolution. We had a digital revolution. And now we're on the verge of a climate revolution that is going to bring us benefits that will transcend those of either the industrial or the digital revolution. And we can point to the business community and how 310 businesses signed a letter. Everyone's sending a letter to President Biden now saying that we want to go climate neutral. And if you also look at the way finance capital is shaping up right now, you'll see that there are more and more people who are saying there's a lot of money to be made in this. And it is the wave of not really the future, but the present. I think we can include information like that in our messaging, suggesting that the smart money is headed in that direction also. All right, Sue and Raina, do we have a queue started up?
Yeah, Madeline had a question.
All right, Madeline, take it away. Please unmute.
Yeah, hi all. A few of us have talked about how the progressive moves and progress that we have made are not being well messaged. And somebody even said the word framing. And I sort of want to see a show of hands about how many people know about Anat Shenker-Osorio and the campaigns that she's succeeded in. Anybody? Tanya?
Yes.
And Ted?
Sarah? I have not. No, I have not.
Oh, okay. How about I'm trying to look at okay. So there are few. So she has led amazing campaigns. She led the campaign in Ireland to repeal the anti-abortion laws. Within 6 weeks, she got Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand elected. Very green representative to the parliament. They had 6 weeks and she got her in. She's been on a whole bunch of podcasts and she's a very electrifying speaker, let's say. I've been in touch with her and actually I just follow her and I liked a bunch of her posts. And so I had written and said, would you please talk with DA about messaging?
Madeline, could I ask you to put some information about her in the chat box? Maybe
will do. Her name, yeah. And I have to look up her website, but she has a lot of very, very good hints right on the website. However, she said, DM me, and I'd like to know that there would be sort of a critical mass of us saying, yes, we really do want to have her speak and kind of teach us about successful progressive campaigns. I'll put that in now.
She would be outstanding, very helpful to us.
Yeah, Tanya, do you want to talk a little bit more about her?
I could just reiterate, I also listened to the series of podcasts about these 5 progressive campaigns around the globe that she and her company created. And they worked, they were quite involved in working with the local people and the campaigns for a long time to figure out what the needs were, and then how to frame it in a way that people said, aha, oh, I get it. We are in this together. Absolutely outstanding. And I think she would be helpful to any messaging campaign. And we could learn a lot from her.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much for that. I also want to mention that Mayor Pete is out there, and he's no slouch either. And if you haven't seen him, he's been in Florida and in Connecticut and in several states speaking to local media. Take a look at how he talks about it, and it could be that we can learn a little bit from him also.
Bruce, may I?
I beg to differ. Pete has swiveled a whole lot. I think he's silver-tongued, but if you track the things that he has stood for and where he got money from, I think because he is you're talking about Pete Buttigieg, no? Yeah, I think it's more hazardous having someone like that trying to talk about messaging, because he is always going to be politicking no matter what. I think he's extremely eloquent, but this is somebody who, I mean, she studied under George Lakoff at, I'm talking about Annette Schenker, sorry. She studied under George Lakoff at Berkeley, and just very, very sharp. And she has no skin in the game in terms of personal gain. So she works a lot with nonprofits and whatever, because she believes in the causes. So let me actually.
Could I interject? My concern is that we have a welter of programs and plans here that are just washing over people, and that there needs to be some cohesion in the message, some greater context, so that people can grasp it. Maybe if there's any way to simplify, and rally around 1 or 2 major type topics, and sort of making that the train that pulls all these other things behind it, in terms of messaging, in terms of informing and activating people.
And I find it overwhelming too, and trying to organize and keep everything in control with these plans. One thing I want to mention to all of us is that I'm seeing that the bipartisan negotiation is scheduled to end by Memorial Day, and that there's a plan to make sure that the American Jobs Plan gets voted on by Labor Day, which I think is too long, but there are timelines in play. And but I think too that it's important for us to see how others, including President Biden, who was in Louisiana speaking about the jobs plan, and there are others speaking in Michigan. And it may be time for more of our representatives to go on the road and talk to their constituents. It sure is a lot to consider. Do we have anyone else in the queue right now?
Karen.
All right.
I just wanted to amplify that we listened to the presentations, which were really good. And I'm sorry I didn't screen save all of the cards to go back and check. And when we got in our breakout room, we were sort of like, what was in the jobs plan? What was here? What you're talking about, this vast amount of information pouring over people, it really does need to be boiled down. Just a few memes, because those things come across my desk every day too. I get, this one from the AFL-CIO and the other one from some other group and an environmental group, and they all talk about what's in the plan and what has to be done, and I still am not sure. So I think there's more to it than that, and I think the other thing, I can't remember if Ted was able to mention it or not, but the idea of broadband and getting, that part of the infrastructure up, getting the word out to people in a way that they can count on. It's here, it's not all over the place. I don't have to go looking for it. Did you hear about, oh no, I missed it? we need to get our message out and very clearly and very simply and keep pounding that and get our members to do what France is doing, I guess.
What we might also be saying is, these are plans and they aren't bills. And it would be good to know that, for example, with the American Jobs Plan, there is a bill called the Moving Forward Act that could be passed in the House and sent to the Senate. And when that happens, then boom, we're focused on that. And right now there are some competing bills in the House, some Republicans too. I'm not going to talk about that, but they're very small bills. And we need to get one through the House and into the Senate, and that will focus our attention extremely. All right. Next person in, Sue, you have your hand up?
Well, I was just going to say, I think all these points about messaging are really, are important, and they seem on target to me. I think in terms of what we can do where we're sitting, it's hard for us to influence the messaging that's coming out, on these plans. It seems to me like, we would want to get to our own representatives and encourage them to support these plans and try to find, I would love to know if there's some phone banking efforts going on to phone into voters in key districts and states to try to flip members of the House or Senate that are key for some of these.
Can I speak or should I wait? Is there a queue?
I don't think we have a queue.
Madeline, I'd like you to go ahead, and then we're going to try to stick to our schedule a little bit. And that was kind of a great transition to actions and announcements. But Madeline, you please go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms, and I admit that I'm a dog with a bone when I get a bee in my bonnet, not to mix metaphors too much, but this is somebody with a phenomenal track record, and the time to be training on messaging is before we have to do major communications, the postcards, the phone banking and everything. And that, kind of getting the word out and kind of putting our heads together in terms of how we get across the progress that's been made so that the midterms, if they're not stolen, sorry, but that we are able to communicate to people that we need to keep that momentum going, and the midterms are very important, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy to, I'm going to contact Julia directly. I actually worked on the global comms team last year, and I'm happy to contact Julia about getting her to speak, and then we can put together kind of a what do they call it, a set, a PowerPoint or whatever. This is how we have to approach things. We're all going to be doing postcards, hopefully. We're all going to be calling people. And yeah.
I want to, at this point, also invite Naomi Aegis, who's in the Women's Caucus Climate Action Team, to give us some information, perhaps about what's going on in that group, and if they have some action recommendations.
Great, thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry that I'm not on video. As my small group heard, I rushed back for this call from the very on-brand urban farming collective that I'm a part of. So I am very dirty and not presentable for camera, but I am glad to be here. And so yes, I am the lead for the Global Women's Caucus Climate Action Team, which is one of the newer action teams under the Women's Caucus. And we organize around climate action issues back in the US and abroad as much as we can. And so right now we are focused on both the jobs plan, which is my group reported back is sort of a Trojan horse of a climate plan. And there's a lot of good climate policy in there that could be improved, needs to be improved. And so contacting your representatives and senators and letting them know that you support the climate provisions in there. And then the second thing that I'll note is there is the Environmental Justice for All Act is working its way through the House and Senate as well. And that is a very progressive piece of legislation that is a really good complement to the plans that we talked about this evening. I will drop the link in the chat for the Climate Action Team's page where you can find out our ongoing work and learn a little bit more about what we have done and what we are doing.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I too am putting in now the Google Doc link for the PowerPoint presentation where if you click on things, you can see the whole text or the fact sheet for the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan. But one of the frustrations is that they're not bills. And so we need to know what are the bills and how are they moving through Congress. I also want to mention, this is kind of related to what we've been talking about in messaging. Once you have passed a bill, then it has to be implemented. And the Democrats Abroad Solidarity Sundays Europe group has that on its agenda for the 30th of May. And Tanya is going to tell us a little bit about that.
Hi. Thanks, Bruce. Yes, I would like to invite all of you to join it because I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. We were very lucky to get a woman. Her name is Elaine Carmack. She is a Harvard scholar and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. And her wheelhouse is governance studies. She has advised very many White Houses about policy implementation. And it's a real good continuation of what we're talking about now. In other words, right now we're all focused, obviously, very crucially on what these proposals contain, how popular they are with the public, getting that word out, how much they're going to cost, what shape they might pass in, or if they won't pass. And this is all very, very important. And that's right what we're in the middle of. But what happens after any legislation is passed might be even more consequential part of all, because Biden is not only addressing economic and social crises, he is aiming to solve our crisis of democracy. And I'll quickly sum that up before I tell you when we are meeting. The failure to execute policy can cripple an administration. George Bush with the Iraq War and the disastrous response to Katrina, the disastrous rollout of Obama's Obamacare website, all of these things hurt the popularity of those presidents and their political viability. They couldn't do anything else domestically the rest of their time in office. But the worst part was the trust in the ability of government to solve people's problems suffered. And that's what Donald Trump leveraged to get into office. And once he vaulted into office, he just worked on that disillusionment and made it even stronger in his own cynical way. So we see more and more people wanting a strong man to just solve problems. Why? Because so many of the promises that our politicians have been elected into office to do, they don't realize, and it has to do with management, how they manage this huge federal bureaucracy, bigger than anything, any companies in the world. And so she's going to go into why they fail and also how they can succeed. And we think this is something that is very critical for our democracy and a very little understood aspect of the Biden-Harris project. So I want to invite all of you to come because we would love to hear your voices and your questions and your thoughts on this as well, and ask her directly. And it's May 30th. From 4 to 5:30 p.m. I'll add the link to the chat and you're all very welcome. We'd love to see you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. For us Eurocentrics, that was Central European time, 4 to 5:30 p.m. on the last Sunday in May. All right, I'm going to skip down briefly because we've been talking about climate issues and how what we're talking about is so important because of that loudly ticking climate clock, to our DA Germany Climate Caucus and ask them to tell us a little bit about their official launch coming up. Ash, are you there to talk about the Climate Caucus?
Excuse me there. Sorry, I had just left the room for a minute. To talk about the Climate Caucus?
Yes, and your launch coming up in June.
Yes, so we have a launch event coming up surrounding the June 5th UN's World Environment Day. We'll be doing a social media climate action bingo event coming up soon. That'll be rolling out in the next week, hopefully. And we'll have a sort of a three-pronged program, which is cleanup, which things to do to help clean up your own carbon footprint and your own habits. Catch up, a lot of resources for learning, catching up on information, and call up. So a June 9th event, 7 to 9 European time or Central European time. And that's all in support of the American Jobs Plan. So calling our senators to give it the best chance we can to try to get it passed as it is, not have too many compromises. So.
Thank you very much, Dash. And now the Progressive Caucus of DA Germany would like to talk about what they're up to. And that is Antar and Caitlin.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. And thanks to everybody here being present today. And I also want to extend a big thank you to a lot of our members that showed up from the DA Progressive Caucus onto this event too. You know, me and Caitlin, we relaunched the Germany Progressive Caucus. We had a fantastic first event on May Day. We essentially introduced the vision and the goals for the caucus, what we were expecting, and we also introduced our steering committee. We started off with a small speech by Sue, and then we kind of discussed what we wanted to do with this caucus, which was essentially make it what the people wanted. We had a speech on the concept of May Day, the origin of May Day, and how that relates to our situation in here and now. We also had a follow-up discussion on the concept of contemporary American worker rights and areas that are in dire need of improvement. And after that, we kind of had a free and open discussion. And in that discussion, like I said, we discussed where our membership wants to go with the Progressive Caucus. And we have lots and lots of new ideas on where we can go from there.
So our next event coming up is on May 29th at 11 a.m. Central European time. So I'm sorry for those who that is inconvenient, but the inspiration for this event came after we were attending the global meeting this past weekend. And we thought of our meeting as sort of kind of a counterbalance might not be the right word, but similar to what the group here is doing with the Biden-Harris Progress Report, where we're keeping our eyes on what's going on in the States. We also want to keep our eyes on what's going on in DA and have a similar kind of DA Progress Report type of event. So what we've envisioned for May 29th is kind of people get together. We're going to talk about some of the decision-making structures within DA, because I think, you know, average DA members don't have a clear conception of how DA actually works, how decisions are made. And we want to be a lot more transparent so that we can really, you know, use our voices to the best way possible. We want to talk about at the global meeting, what were some of the important resolutions that passed and how can we get behind some of those progressive resolutions? Not all the resolutions got a vote, and some of them are extremely important. And there will be another meeting held within under 180 days for DPCA voting reps to vote on very, very important resolutions that many of our members care about. So we want to talk about what those resolutions are. How can we, as a group, get behind those and try to get our DPCA voting reps to approve those. and also just let people know that they can write their own resolutions and bylaw proposals. I think people don't really know that they can do that too. So yeah, the goal is make DA more transparent, you know, work together more so that we can be this force of accountability and also positive change within the organization. So I'm going to pop the link in the chat. We would love to see anyone there. Also love to hear your ideas and impressions. We have lots of people coming who have varied levels of experience with NDA. So I don't know if we're taking questions now or at the end, Bruce.
I want to thank you very much and pick up on what you said with two comments. In 2019, Democrats Abroad at its annual general meeting in Washington passed two resolutions overwhelmingly. One was in support of the new Green Deal, or the Green New Deal, and the other one was a Medicare for All resolution. And since those resolutions were passed, it seems to me Democrats Abroad has been fairly quiet on those two resolutions. And it could be that we would like to shed more light on those and others that we consider very important, and to point out that Democrats Abroad pass these resolutions. What Tanya said seems relevant here too. You can pass a resolution just like you can pass a bill, but if you don't implement it, if you don't live it effectively, then it can really be unproductive or counterproductive. And that feeds back into progress report number 5. I'm hoping that some of the people here will be interested in collaborating with us. After the May 29th meeting, we're going to have Memorial Day, and that's the day on which the bipartisan negotiation should be over, maybe successful, maybe not, but at that point, things are going to ramp up considerably for the American Jobs Plan, maybe with the American Families Plan. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. We are shooting for a date, probably the 24th of June. So keep that in mind, and we will message about it very effectively as soon as we have it set in stone. I want to end with a couple action recommendations. Yes?
Okay. When you're ready, we have 2 in the queue. So when you finish your action recommendations, we have 2 folks who have a few things they'd like to say.
Very good. Thank you. I'll be quick. You can see there links to the contacting representatives and senators, also the option to support the Thrive agenda. And you know, there are organizations out there who are really effective at communicating, and they have their own initiatives, their offers to take action. I'm going to put in a plug for the Sunrise Movement. If you go there, you'll just be awestruck at what they're doing and the options they have for you. And the Sierra Club right now is running a swing state letter writing campaign to register voters for the midterms, with the understanding that we right now have that 50-50 split in the Senate and a razor thin majority in the House, and all of those bills being passed in the states. And that means that right now we have to be really active in doing even better than 2020 with registering voters and getting out the votes. And that's why Renee McCormick and I depicted there, wrote our first 50 letters that our son took back to Washington and put in the mailbox, and now they're in Arizona, where we hope 50 new people will register to vote. Find your favorite organization, and you probably are already doing it. Think about even upping your activity. And Sue, who's the first person in the queue?
Oh, that's Stephanie.
Okay.
Followed by Susan Vaillant.
All right, Stephanie.
Hi, this is actually what was just talked about with the resolution. This is a great segue because at last weekend's International DA meeting, the DPCA meeting, Resolution 21 was passed, which was in support of transgender rights and the Equality Act. And in the resolution was language saying that we committed to mobilizing our members to pass the Equality Act and fight for a right for the LGBTQ community. So in line with that, on June 8th, DA UK is having an action night, taking action to urge Congress to pass the Equality Act. which is an act to expand civil rights protections to the LGBTQ plus community. So that's June 8th, 6 p.m. British time, 7 p.m. Central European time. And Martha McDevitt-Pugh, co-chair of the DA Global LGBTQ Caucus, will join us to share info about the bill and background. Then we'll model a call to our senator, and then everyone will go into breakout rooms to call your own senators to urge them to take action. And again, it's important to urge them to pass the bill, and also important to urge your senators or thank them for supporting the bill if they do. It's really important that senators know they have our support for bills that are seen by some as controversial. But the bill does have wide support. So that's June 8th, 7 p.m. CET, and I will put information in the chat. There's not a link up yet, but feel free to email me to make sure you get info on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And Susan?
Hey, am I on mute? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah, okay. I just was rather flattered almost to hear someone speak about the resolutions, and also sort of suggest that maybe there wasn't enough involvement of the grassroots, which I totally agree with. And I am one of the grassroots. I don't have a vote for anything in DA anymore, since I'm no longer chapter chair of Strasbourg, which was like 15 years ago. But we encourage everyone to, prepare the resolutions. Unfortunately, in DA, you have to find a voting member. If you want to get it adopted, I can't do anything about that. As I said, I'm not even a voting member myself. I think that ought to be changed, and they ought to be open much wider, so that people who are members, particularly the active members, but it could be all the members, can also have a say about the resolutions. I mean, we represent how many people are in DA, how many members, I don't know exactly, but they might not all agree or even be aware of these subjects or the topics of the resolutions. So please don't despair. What the resolutions committee really does everything to help decent resolutions get adopted. That's what we're there for. And so don't be shy, organize, send in all your texts. And, what used to be that you could have resolutions only addressed at general meetings, which were all over the world. And now we can have them year round if necessary, or even as convenient. So just wanted to make that point. I'm sorry, I got to stand up for my dear committee members.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and